Ugh, I'm so bored!
Me too. So it's been a while, life's been rather hectic, but after weeks of working out my retorts to this video, we're here. So, to explain the discussion, cartoon reviewer Cosmo Dori did a review of an episode of SpongeBob SquarePants called Ink Lemonade. This was covered by a commentator called Professor Cartoons. This was covered by a commentator called Dwebly, which was covered by a commentator called Dead Mem Koopa, which was covered by Keyblade Master. That's the situation in short. I'm specifically covering Keyblade Master in this video. Let's begin.
But before I go into this video, notice how Dwebly's video is only 9 minutes and 48 seconds long, while Meganoop's full video is 24 minutes and 28 seconds. Keep that in mind while watching this horrible video.
Alright, several things wrong, Heroes. Let's get the smallest but most obvious issue out of the way. These visuals suck. As throughout this entire video, we're agreed to an image of a Koopa on a background, which is really dull, as anyone who doesn't listen to YouTube videos in the background will be completely bored by the lack of visual stimulation.
I'm feeling so attacked right now. Humor aside, this point is both poorly worded and subjective at best. First, the idea that Koopa's visuals being just a Koopa on a background not being visually stimulating is worded as if the idea alone of a Koopa on a background isn't visually stimulating. If this was the case, every commentator in the community who doesn't use themselves on camera would fall under the same ideological rhetoric. After all, your visuals are just your original character on a background. Mine is just a Phantasy Star Online character on a background. Professor Cartoons, as seen later, is just a man with his pipe. I suppose you may be attempting to get across the idea that it's just the singular image of the Koopa, with no movement seen elsewhere on screen. However, if this was the case, that would still be subjective at best. What may not be visually stimulating to you, may not necessarily be visually unstimulating to others. It's not like the arguments Koopa makes are made hard to hear through simple visuals. It's just simplicity for simplicity's sake. Continuing on that, allow me to take an ideology from a video released before your own that you may remember. As much as I'm not a fan of this video either, there is one redeeming quality of it, being the ideology of this potentially being a conscious choice that focuses on his audio over his visuals. Koopa may not be one to care about his visuals, and perhaps he's using this auditory focus to target an audience who do use commentaries for background noise. Those who solely focus on the video may not be a demographic that Koopa really cares about. Talking about the hypothetical people who watch over the video instead of listening to it is somewhat comparable to bringing up children when talking about how movies shouldn't be scary. It's not quite right.
Like, you wouldn't even need to try that hard to get visual stimulation. Like, get a moving background, multiple pictures of a Koopa Troopa, a picture of Summer Camilla, anything that would provide some sort of visual stimulation.
Those methods would also not inherently stimulate a viewer though. It may be stimulant to you, but to put it quite blatantly, not everyone is you. That may sound like a mere cop-out, but if you allow me to elaborate. Art is not inherently movement-based. In fact, a lot of paintings have no movement at all, but you'd be looked at as pretty strange if you were to call a painting visually unstimulating because of its lack of movement. Not saying Koopa's video is entirely that of a Van Gogh, but my point is, this criticism of his visuals doesn't inherently work given that non-moving visuals can still function as effectively as visuals that do move. I'll skip the rest of this interjection, as the rest of it addresses Koopa's point well enough.
Meet Professor Cartoons.
I'm sorry. Did you just say Professor Cartoons? Oh my god. It's really funny how you mispronounce a name that came from a mispronunciation of cartoons.
Actually, no, we didn't, since if you paid any sort of attention to Dwebly's video, then you could clearly hear him say Professor Cartoons and not Tuttoons. Like, I get how you got to this conclusion due to Dwebly's below average mic quality and piss poor audio balancing, but you never really pointed those things out and instead focused on something that was never really there in the first place.
You're critiquing Koopa for not bringing up a criticism against Dwebly's video while at the same time acknowledging how Koopa came to the conclusion he came to with the critique he does bring up. What really is the purpose to this interjection? Even had Koopa misunderstood Dwebly bringing up Cartoon's name, the fact you can bring up how understandable the conclusion is better emphasizes the problem with Dwebley's audio and poor enunciation if nothing else.
With that being said, this video...
I'm sorry, I got a hard time understanding what you just said there. Did you mean that his video was bad or something else?
Wait, really? Cause it's pretty obvious what Dwebley is trying to say, as despite him being a fan of Professor Katoons, he still found Katoons' commentary to be garbage. Like, come on, Koopa, this kind of stuff shouldn't be that hard to understand. I mean, if you explain more on how you couldn't understand Dwebley due to some unknown factor, then I could understand this confusion, but as it stands, your confusion feels arbitrary. Not to mention that this bit of where Dwebley talked about his admiration for the target only for him to state a video he dislikes is a very common CC trope, which can easily be noticed. But hey, we need to have a point for the sake of having a point, since that shit worked so well before, am I right?
Except it's not a point just to have a point, it's another point trying to tackle a potential issue with Dwebley's wording. While it's not particularly valid, and I can commend your tackling of said discrepancy. Had Koopa's point held merit and there was an issue with Dwebley's introductory statements of who Professor Katoons is, then the confusion that Koopa has would demonstrate how hard the video would be to follow along to. With this in consideration, what other point did Koopa make to just interject? Previously, Koopa had made a point in reference to Dwebley's incoherent pronunciation, which could be an issue considering how lost in translation his points could be without being able to understand what your target is saying. This was followed by a point where Koopa was asking the relevancy to Dwebley being in the commentary community within a video talking about Professor Katoons.
Formerly known as Megadupe TV. Despite me being in the CC now, I still enjoy its content.
What does you being in the CC have to do with liking someone's videos?
Now that said, you were able to describe why this would be important to Dwebley's video, being that it could negate any potential presumptions of bias against the individual. With that said, I have a hard time labeling this as making a point to make a point, as it's very common to point out when an interjection is made to just artificially extend the video's runtime with arbitrary non-sequiturs. It's better to avoid redundancies in a debate as to not distract from the conversation being had.
It hurts me to say this, but there's a new worst SpongeBob episode.
I mean, is it really surprising considering the show is literally 19 years old at this point? Even if the show is getting better, you can't just expect there to not be a shit episode every once in a while.
First of all, why is the original in black and white?
Why is that one of your complaints exactly? Megadupe probably did this because of copyright so that his video would stay up instead of get taken down by Viacom. Seriously, this is just such a nitpick.
You do know that production issues don't automatically equal nitpicks, right? Since it would be quite jarring for someone to see Cosmodor's video grayscale in Katoons' video when compared to Cosmodor's original video having color. Which is something Dwebley goes on to explain regarding the presentation, and I bet you cut it out.
This is pretty distracting to say the least. I get why your avatar is in black and white, because some old-timey guy, but why the original video? Is this a nitpick at the end of the day? Yeah, it is, but I don't care, it's still distracting.
Also, if Katoons did grayscale Cosmodor's video to avoid copyright problems with Viacom, then why is Cosmodor's video still up? Since going by your logic, his video should have been taken down, or at least hit with some form of copyright claim, which isn't the case upon viewing the video.
Keyblade, where is the evidence supporting your claim that there's no copyright claim on the video? That's not typically a thing YouTube shows to the overall public, unless you're mistaking a copyright claim for a copyright strike. This point cannot work as there's no way that anyone other than Cosmodor is able to know whether or not a video is claimed by copyright except by some outside source that you do not give us.
So, in the end, it's not really a nitpick. I mean, if you want to talk about nitpicks, then a nitpick would be something like, oh, you said Katoons despite that not being true in the slightest. But who would be so dumb as to do that?
First of all, shall we return to the section of your counterpoint where you even affirm the understanding of why Koopa came to the conclusion he did, showing that there's some problems with pronunciation from Dwebley's video? You can make the pot shot all you want, this becomes an issue with your counter-argument here as Koopa was pointing out said problem with the way Dwebley spoke within his video. On that point of discussion, your example of a true nitpick is nullified by your continual push of the narrative that Dwebley was incredibly well understood regardless of his slight mumbly tone and less than stellar audio quality, as the complaint in of itself becomes problematic. Not due to the fact it's a nitpick, which by your own admission are points that could be valid regardless, but by the fact that your presumption perpetuates a notion that the point is more problematic due to it being invalid. However, regarding this supposed nitpick, I also have a problem with the idea that it is a nitpick to begin with. I perhaps am repeating a bit here, but if Dwebley is not well understood within his video, then his points could be misunderstood or otherwise misconstrued, and only third parties who could understand him better would be able to correct the information that the initial party misunderstood. This is a much bigger problem than you would lead on. As for Dwebli's critique regarding the monochromatic video effect on Cosmodori's video, this doesn't change anything regarding the discussion and only serves as an effect on the video for theoretically reasons regarding surpassing YouTube's notoriously haphazard copyright rules and regulations. This is a nitpick, even by Dwebli's own admission that you show off within your own video. To say otherwise is pushing a bigger problem onto something that doesn't change the confines of discussion or otherwise hurt the video any more than subjectively on Dwebli's end, as he finds it personally a distraction, though never elaborates as to why. And as far as that goes, Dwebly could have always restored the initial video from COSMODOR if the choice of monochromatic effects is that distracting to him.
I guess we can scratch off speech impediment on a Patrick stupidity level bingo card. And I swear to God, they have dumped him down endlessly in this episode. Even in other ones of the same season where they went the route of overemphasizing his stupidity levels, he didn't look like a big pink monkey man as he does here. I thought that's what his sister is for anyway.
Oh yes, because how dare they have character designs that display his stupidity? Seriously, that's your complaint? That he looks like a big monkey man even though he is a stupid character? Fucking hell, man.
His main point was that Patrick was annoying. Not that he was a stupid monkey. He just took one part of his argument and pretending that that was his main complaint.
You're doing the same thing Megadoob supposedly did. The monkey part wasn't the main part of Megadoob's point. The part where he was talking about rising Patrick's stupidity levels was the main part.
That wasn't Katoons' point either, as he was addressing how only one of Cosmodor's complaints is stupid, that being how the designers made Patrick look like a monkey, not the fact that the writers increased Patrick's level of stupidity.
Actually, this is where everyone is misunderstanding the conversation, as COSMODOR was talking about how they dumbed Patrick down within this episode, overemphasizing the lack of intellect he has and making him seem more ape-like than he normally does, when the creators of SpongeBob SquarePants had previously emphasized that aspect of his character. Professor Katoons was focusing on how Patrick's design looked like a monkey to emphasize his stupidity on purpose, which only addresses half the problem that Cosmodor had, considering his complaint was towards the fact that they're overemphasizing Patrick's dumb, and all Katoons did was explain why they did so. Dwebly pointed out the latter half of Professor Katoons' argument but misconstrued the first bit of Cosmodor's, as Dwebly was under the presumption that Cosmodor was saying Patrick was annoying, when Cosmodor clearly focused on the rather primal nature that Patrick was exuberating within this episode. Koopa, again, managed to argue the latter half of Dwebly's point, however misinterpreted Katoons' point, as he was specifically focused on the fact that they made the character seem more ape-like physically to better demonstrate the lack of intelligence the character has, ignoring the initial complaint in of itself, considering the problem, again, came from the exaggeration of Patrick's low IQ. Technically, Keyblade Master is probably the best of this interaction, as technically he was able to clarify that Professor Katoons was talking about the ape-like look that Patrick had. However, COSMODOR was only referring to the overemphasis of Patrick's intellect, or lack thereof. The way he had looked within this episode was just one example to the aspects of Patrick's character that they made more prominent. They are not separate problems that COSMODOR has. I am going to be skipping ahead a bit. All we're missing is some repeat points regarding video filters and how distracting they are.
For me, if I could still see the video clearly, filters aren't distracting.
Alright, good for you, but you do realize that just because you don't find filters distracting doesn't mean that anyone else can have an issue with a filter being distracting.
How ironic when you consider some of the previous talking points based on production we discussed earlier. Again, we're going to be skipping a rather lengthy point where Keyblade Master just gets really mad over Koopa mentioning the Neo Commentary Community label, as if that really means anything at the end of the day either, and there's not particularly anything I wish to cover from there, as I was barely within the community by 2017.
SpongeBob, who's suddenly just kinda there, scares Squidward with a megaphone. A gag they have already used 3 times now, I should add, making Squidward pouring into Patrick's lemonade. Yes, this is gross, especially considering it's coming out of Squidward's nose, but don't worry, it gets worse, because SpongeBob and Patrick's second customer then drinks Squidward's snot water, instantly getting addicted to it.
Seriously? Is this what cartoon reviewers are bitching about now? Ink that doesn't even look that disgusting? Granted, it came out of Squidward's nose, but at the end of the day, it's just fucking ink. Is that really that disgusting now?
Okay, it may look disgusting to you, but others may find it gross. Your subjectivity does not counter Cosmo or really anyone else's subjectivity.
Megadoob never said it did. This is a useless point.
Okay, now I'm starting to question if you even know what a dictionary is, since I don't think that's how pointless is defined. As Katoons was questioning how someone can be disgusted by something like Squid Ink, in which Dwebley brought up how Katoons bringing up his subjectivity does nothing to debunk Cosmodor's subjectivity. Now granted, this isn't a good point, as Squid Ink really isn't that disgusting, and Katoons was just confused on how someone can be grossed out by something minimal like Squid Ink. So while Dwebley's point may be bad, it wouldn't exactly be pointless.
Are we just going to ignore the problem of you saying that Squid Ink isn't that disgusting while the conversation is about a subjective stance on what could be found as such? The idea that Cosmodor could hypothetically find Squid Ink disgusting is the point of Dwebley's counter-argument. This is a much more valid point than you lead on, because if Cosmodor finds Squid Ink to be less than pleasant, then questioning how anyone could be disgusted by it on concept is ignorant of that person's opinion on the matter.
Get Squidward into making more ink with him ripping off his whole skin in front. Feels just like old season 6 times, doesn't it?
I never understood why these cartoon reviewing retards constantly spurg out over gross out in a cartoon.
And this is the definition of a non-interjection. All this is just saying, my opinion's always fact.
Okay, I really don't see the point here. He was pointing out that cartoon reviewers always spurg out. I don't think it really matters whether he thinks his opinion was a fact or not.
Actually, it does matter if Katoons is treating his opinion as a fact, as if that's the case, then it makes Katoons look arrogant, as he believes that since gross out humor doesn't bother him, so therefore cartoon reviewers need to stop misusing autism like a buzzword about this kind of humor. So in the end, it does matter if Katoons interjects to treat his opinion like it's a fact.
But Professor Katoons wasn't treating his opinion as fact. He was merely saying that he doesn't understand the overabundance of criticisms towards gross out within the cartoon reviewing community, which is a non-interjection since it doesn't matter that he doesn't understand the distaste towards humor that is gross. It doesn't do anything to the discussion. It's a non sequitur that should have been taken out of his video. Regardless, to address the actual point, Keyblade's interjection here doesn't actually address Koopa's point. Koopa was saying that it doesn't matter that Professor Katoons believes his opinion to be more truthful than it is, as it doesn't really change the interjection Katoons has made. You technically do address the general problems with coming into a discussion to subjectively disagree with an interjection. But the general issues don't apply here, as Katoons' opinion doesn't come into play, which you even later acknowledge.
Just too bad he wasn't, and Dwebley's point is broken beyond belief, but hey, I'm not here to make a third commentary on him. That'll just give him more fuel for his needless hate boner.
So if you acknowledge that Professor Katoons' opinions don't influence his argument, then why are you here attempting to argue the problems with an opinion in a discussion like this? Also, as a general aside, if you don't want to fuel Dwebley's hate boner for you, then why would you leave in a blatant pot shot directed at him with the intent to antagonize him? That doesn't really make any sense.
I seriously can't remember the last time Patrick was portrayed as so malicious, so keen on completely destroying Squidward, so driven by the thought of squeezing even the last drop of ink out of him.
You think Patrick is being represented as malicious? No, he isn't. It's shit like this that makes me wonder if you even saw the episode. It's clear that they're portraying Patrick as this dumbass who's just trying to do whatever he can to make his lemonade business work.
Not as this evil tyrant trying to kill Squidward. Like, what the hell are you even talking about?
Hey, Katoon, if you screw up on your line delivery, you can either just re-record or edit it out. It's not that hard. Keeping this stuff in makes you come off as really lazy.
Dwebley, that's pretty hypocritical considering sometimes in this video, you screw up on your line delivery and you don't re-record or cut it out. Instead, what you do is put in subtitles for what you meant to say.
No, there's clearly a difference between Dwebley's flub-up and Katoons' flub-up, as with Katoons' flub-up, it's an incredibly easy-to-fix flub-up where we repeat the same word twice, which could easily be fixed with audio editing. While with Dwebley, he only messed up on just one word, and since it was pretty small, he decided to put text on screen to show what he actually meant to say. So overall, when comparing these two, Katoons is still the lazier one in this situation, due to either his laziness or lack of care to remove a single evil out of his line recording.
What are you talking about? Dwebley could still record his lines again or edit in the fixed word into his audio. Comparing the two flub-ups doesn't change the hypocrisy of Dwebley leaving in Freudian slips whilst critiquing Professor Katoons for his stuttering. Both can fix it by editing or recording over the problems. The video essentially ends there. There's an extra point that appears valid, so I have nothing else to address here. I suppose this video being a year old by this point means I shouldn't really need to have overall final thoughts, so I will not bore you with the details. With that said, I believe I'm done here. This is Pink Robot, shutting down until next time.